All right, chapter 5 is over learning, and this is how we learn through experience to know whether to increase the likelihood of a behavior or decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring. So, first, what is learning? Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. And learning is comprised of three components. One, it leads to either a permanent or mostly permanent change in behavior. It's the result of experience. And then learning also creates new pathways or neural pathways in the brain. So, for example, maybe you're 1 or 2 years old, you're learning how to use spoons and forks to eat, and you learn through maybe watching someone, watching your parents, watching your siblings, and the first few times you use it, you get food all over your face. You might miss your mouth. You only get it halfway in your mouth. You just make a mess. You can't hold the spoon quite the right way because you don't have those fine motor skills quite yet. But over time, it begins to be a more smooth process. You can go from scooping into your bowl straight into your mouth and get all the food in your mouth. By the time you're, maybe 3 or 4 years old, you're not really making much of a mess anymore. And that's because one, this learning has led to a permanent or mostly permanent change in behavior. Sometimes you still may eat with your hands, with your fingers. Sometimes you still may make a mess, but not as much. It's a result of experience. You did it over and over and over again, pretty much every day for years. And then three, it creates these new pathways in your brain so that it becomes muscle memory. It becomes something that you don't even have to think about. And it's something that you just know how to do without even thinking about it. So that's what learning is. It's permanent change in behavior, a result of experience, and pathways form in the brain to make it easier to do. Okay, so we're going to talk about two different types of conditioning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is more of a result of your environment, and operant conditioning is more based off of voluntary behavior. So classical conditioning is an automatic or reflexive type of learning that occurs by making associations between different events and stimuli. So whenever you think of classical conditioning, I want you to think of making associations, okay? That's what's most important to remember when thinking of classical conditioning. So I've got a few terms beneath classical conditioning, within classical conditioning, to talk about, and we're going to use one overarching example to learn about classical conditioning. Now, I'm sure that if you guys have heard of classical conditioning, you've heard about Pavlov's dogs, where they learned to salivate or get hungry at the sound of a bell. And that's because every time they heard this bell ring, it meant it was dinner time. It meant it was time to eat. So salivating, your mouth filling up with saliva, is your body's natural response to knowing that food is coming or smelling food, because salivary glands secreting that is the first step in digestion. It helps break down the food that is in your mouth as you're chewing. So first, the first step in classical conditioning is there is an unconditioned stimulus, which is a stimulus that elicits a natural or reflexive response without prior experience. An unconditioned stimulus then causes an unconditioned response. So an unconditioned response is the naturally occurring or reflexive response to an unconditioned stimulus. So for example, I'm going to do this overarching example of when you smell food, you get hungry and salivate. So you smell that pizza cooking in the oven. Most of us like pizza. When I smell a pizza cooking in the oven, it smells really good. It makes me hungry and makes me salivate, makes my body prepared to eat that pizza. Well, the unconditioned stimulus is the smell of the food, which elicits an unconditioned response. It's something that I did not learn. It's something that my body automatically, reflexively, naturally does, is secrete this saliva. So that's an unconditioned response. So a neutral response is a stimulus that doesn't naturally elicit the reflexive desired response in classical conditioning. So if we're talking about learning, making an associated response, a neutral stimulus does not do this. So say you're at school, your first day of school ever, and you're in kindergarten or whatever, and you hear the school bell ring. Well, that doesn't make you hungry or make you salivate. It doesn't cause anything. So it's a neutral stimulus. However, uh, the school bell ringing can become a conditioned stimulus. How? We'll get into that. So a conditioned stimulus is a previously neutral stimulus that comes to produce the conditioned response because of an association with the unconditioned stimulus. So the bell ringing for lunch can create a conditioned response. This occurs when a conditioned response occurs when a previously neutral stimulus leads to the response originally associated with the unconditioned stimulus. So what was the unconditioned stimulus? The smell of pizza or the smell of food. The smell of food now makes you hungry, makes you salivate. So how does a neutral stimulus, such as the bell ringing, become a conditioned stimulus? Because over and over and over again, when the bell dismisses you to go to lunch, you know you're about to eat. Maybe you start smelling the food from the kitchen wafting down to your classroom. So a conditioned stimulus would be the bell ringing for lunch, which then creates the conditioned response, which is salivating and getting hungry. Okay, so that is the example we're going with for this whole classical conditioning. So the acquisition phase is how long it takes for a neutral stimulus to become a conditioned stimulus. So how long did it take for the bell ringing for lunch make you start salivating? Was it a week? Was it a month? Was it 100 days? Was it half the year? How long did it take for the neutral stimulus to evoke the conditioned response? Or how long did it take for the neutral stimulus to become a conditioned stimulus? Then we have extinction. This is the disappearance of a learned behavior when the behavior is no longer reinforced or no longer associated with the unconditioned stimulus. Let's say halfway through the school year, you've gone through this acquisition phase. And so every time that school bell rings, you get hungry and you start to salivate. What if the bell system stops working, but you're still salivating at lunchtime? So that salivation is not because of the bell anymore. It's because you're about to eat. So the extinction is a disappearance of a learned behavior when the behavior is no longer reinforced or no longer associated with the unconditioned stimulus. So let's say after you come back from Christmas break, the bell system no longer works anymore. It stops ringing. So now you're just going through your day without any bells ringing. So that's not what's dismissing you for lunch. So you're no longer associating a bell ring with going to lunch. Okay, so that's extinction. However, spontaneous recovery can occur. Let's say you come back from spring break and all of a sudden the bells start working again. So you have this brief reappearance of a previously extinguished response. So you're no longer relying on the bell ringing to make you start salivating for lunch, but all of a sudden the bell starts working again. The day after you come back from spring break, and that next thing you know, you're salivating at just the sound of the bell. Okay, whether or not that means you're going to lunch. So that's spontaneous recovery, a brief reappearance of a previously extinguished response. Now, do you start salivating at the sound of any type of bell? Is it so if it's at your school, maybe you're at another school for some kind of school event, maybe you hear a bell go off on someone's phone, whatever it is. If all of those make you salivate as well, then that is a case of stimulus generalization. This is responding to similar stimuli it says stimuli that's similar to but distinct. So it's not that school bell. So similar to but distinct from the original stimulus. Does that still make you hungry and salivate? If so, stimulus generalization. If not, if it's only that distinct sound, only the distinct sound of that school bell that makes you salivate and hungry, that would be stimulus discrimination, responding to the original stimulus only without responding to other stimuli. Then there's higher order conditioning, and this is where that conditioned stimulus, which would be the bell ringing, eventually acts as an unconditioned stimulus in a second round of conditioning. So let's say 1 or 2 minutes before the bell rings for lunch, every day kids start packing up, your classmates start packing up their backpacks, okay? And maybe that's what starts you salivating rather than the bell itself, because you know that lunch is about to come because kids start packing up their backpacks because the bell starts to ring, which then leads you to lunch. So in higher order conditioning, the bell ringing becomes the unconditioned stimulus, and then your classmates packing up their backpacks a minute or two early becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response would be you start salivating and you get hungry. Number one, the neutral stimulus, when paired with an unconditioned stimulus, becomes a blank in classical conditioning. The neutral stimulus becomes B, the conditioned stimulus. Number two, every week, Jade spends her allowance on ½ pound of sour lemon gummy candies, even though they always make her mouth water. One day, as she is walking down the street, Jade sees a girl carrying a little white bag that looks like a candy shop bag. Jade notices that her mouth is puckering and overflowing with saliva. In this example, the unconditioned stimulus is the D, little white bag. Number three, normally when food is placed in the mouth of any animal, the salivary glands start releasing saliva to help with chewing and digestion. In terms of Pavlov's analysis of learning, salivation would be referred to as a what? D, unconditioned response. Number four, don't worry about number four. I was going to include some of that information, but I decided not to, so don't worry about number four. Number five, in the past, thunder has made you flinch because the loud noises scare you. Lightning always comes before the thunder, and after time, you begin to flinch as soon as the lightning strikes. In this scenario, lightning can be interpreted as the A, conditioned stimulus. Number six, in classical conditioning, blank occurs when the conditioned stimulus is no longer paired with the unconditioned stimulus. That'd be A, extinction. And number seven, Martha trains her cat Whiskers to salivate to the sound of a bell. She rings the bell every 15 minutes and doesn't follow it with food for Whiskers. Whiskers salivates less and less and finally stops salivating at the sound of the ringing bell. A week later, she finds Whiskers salivating to the sound of a ringing bell. Which of the following terms explains this response? B, spontaneous recovery. Okay, so that was all on classical conditioning. Now we're on to operant conditioning, which when you hear of operant conditioning, I want you to think of voluntary behavior, okay? So operant conditioning is learning related to voluntary behavior that occurs through the application of consequences after a particular behavior is performed. So this is learned responses through experience to increase or decrease the frequency of a certain behavior. So the overarching example I'm going to be using for operant conditioning is, let's say you're 7 years old and your mom tells you to put on a jacket to play outside with your friends because it's cold, okay? So the law of effect says if the response produces a satisfying effect, the response is likely to occur again. So let's say your mom tells you to wear your jacket to play outside with your friends because it's 30 degrees outside and it's cold, and you wear your jacket or your coat and you stay warm, that is a positive response. So it increases the likelihood of you doing that again. However, let's say you don't wear your coat and you go outside and play with your friends and you're freezing the whole time and you run back inside because you're cold, that'd be a negative response. So that decreases the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. So we've got several different types of reinforcers that increase or decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring. So we've got a primary reinforcer. This is a naturally reinforcing stimuli because they satisfy a basic biological need such as hunger or thirst. So for this example, wearing a coat would be the primary reinforcer because it helps keep you warm, which is a biological need to keep your body temperature around 98.6 degrees. So the primary reinforcer is to be warm, okay? To be warm and to keep your body temperature at a normal temperature. Then we have the secondary reinforcer, which is something that becomes satisfying or pleasurable through its association with the primary reinforcer. So because you stayed warm, you're able to stay outside with your friends longer. You're able to play with your friends longer. So that would be a secondary reinforcer, something that becomes satisfying due to its association with the primary. Okay. Then we have immediate reinforcement. This is when the desired behavior and the delivery of a reinforcer occur very close in time. So let's say your mom tells you to wear your coat outside because it's cold and you want to play with your friends. So immediate reinforcement would be you are warm, so you can stay outside longer. You can play with your friends longer. So that would be an immediate reinforcement. A delayed reinforcement would be a significant delay in time between the desired response and the delivery of the reinforcement. And so that could maybe be the next time it's cold, it might be a week or a month or however long before it's 30 degrees again outside. But the next time it's cold, your mom trusts you to keep your coat on because you did the previous time and you stayed warm. So your mom trusts you to keep your coat on so you get to play outside longer. So that would be a delayed reinforcement. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of positive and negative reinforcement when it comes to making someone do something you want them to do, whether you're a coach for a football team or you're a teacher or you're a parent or a friend, whatever it is, whatever your role is. A lot of people do not get positive and negative reinforcement correct. And we'll get into why people do not use positive and negative reinforcement, those terms correctly. There's some, I think the way people learn it is not correct. And so they have an incorrect understanding of what those mean. So we've got positive reinforcement. So what reinforcers are they increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring. That's what you're trying to get someone to do. You're trying to get your child, your 7-year-old child, to wear his coat. Okay. So positive reinforcement would say, if you wear the jacket, I'll make hot cocoa. Say you're the mom. Say I'm a mom of a 7-year-old. I'm not, but say I am. A positive reinforcement would say, son, if you wear a jacket outside to play with your friends, when you come back inside, I'll make hot cocoa. So that is something that strengthens or increases the likelihood of a behavior by adding a pleasurable consequence. Okay. However, a negative reinforcement would be strengthening or increasing a response by removing an unpleasant consequence. Okay. So if I tell my son, I'm trying to increase his likelihood of wearing a jacket, I'm trying to increase the likelihood of this positive behavior. So, son, if you wear a jacket outside, I won't make you come inside early. Okay, so I'm removing the unpleasant consequence of coming inside early. I'm going to let him stay outside. So I'm removing the unpleasant consequence of coming in early. So I'm increasing the likelihood that he will keep his coat on. Okay, so that is reinforcement. I am trying to make a behavior occur. However, punishment is trying to decrease the probability of a behavior occurring again. So while on reinforcement, I'm trying to increase the likelihood of my son wearing a coat. Punishment, I'm trying to decrease the likelihood of my son not wearing a coat. So that's where punishment comes into play. Punishment is consequences for behavior that decrease the probability of that behavior occurring again. So for positive punishment, I'm going to add something undesirable after behavior with the intention of decreasing the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future. So for positive punishment, I'm going to say, son, if you don't wear a coat outside while playing with your friends, I'm going to make you come inside and do the dishes. So I'm adding something undesirable to help decrease the likelihood of him not wearing his coat outside playing with his friends. Okay. So that's positive punishment. Negative punishment is removing something desirable or enjoyable after a behavior with the intention of decreasing the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future. So negative punishment would say, son, if you don't wear your jacket, you cannot hang out with your friends. I'm removing something desirable. So with positive, for both positive reinforcement and positive punishment, I am adding something. So positive reinforcement, I'm adding something positive. Positive punishment, I'm adding something undesirable. For negative, I'm removing something. For negative reinforcement, I'm removing something undesirable. For negative punishment, I'm removing something desirable. And so what I think some people get mixed up is they think that, yeah, positive reinforcement is I'm adding something, I'm going to give someone a reward. So let's say you're a football coach. All right, if you guys do all the drills the correct way, then I'm going to treat you guys all to some ice cream. That is a positive reinforcement. But what a lot of people think negative reinforcement is if you don't do the drills correct, I'm going to add running hills onto the set of drills. Okay. I'm going to make you run for another 20 minutes. Well, that wouldn't be negative reinforcement, because negative reinforcement is strengthening or increasing a response by removing something. I just added something onto what they're doing, and that's not increasing the likelihood of them doing something. That's decreasing the likelihood of them doing something poorly. So that would be positive punishment. If I'm adding something undesirable to decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring again, that'd be positive punishment, not negative reinforcement. So that is something that I think a lot of people get mixed up. And now that you know the difference between reinforcement and punishment, maybe you'll start to see where some people get that mixed up. Okay, so a little bit more review. Number one, discrimination, generalization, and extinction occur in, that'd be C, both operant and classical conditioning. I know I didn't talk about it previously, but I'm telling you now, these things occur in both operant and classical conditioning. Number two, blank reinforcement occurs when something pleasant follows a behavior. And that would be A, positive reinforcement. Number three, Fred is afraid of spiders. He won't even watch a nature show on TV about them. When he sees a picture of a spider, he has a panic attack. But when he avoids looking at the image, his panic goes away. Fred's avoidance of spiders is B, negatively reinforced. He is rewarded by his anxiety going down. So something negative is being removed, and that would be negative reinforcement. Number four, Kyla wants to make sure her dog Axel does not beg for food from the table. Every time Axel begs, Kyla says no in a sharp, scolding voice, and she never gives in. Kyla is using C, positive punishment, because she is adding something undesirable to reduce the likelihood of a behavior occurring again. She does not want Axel to beg for food anymore, so she adds the unpleasant no in a sharp, scolding voice to prevent her dog from doing that again. Number five, being grounded or put in timeout effectively removes pleasant stimuli, which would be the attention from others, from the individual. This is called D, negative punishment. So you're taking away something pleasant. So taking away would be negative. And punishment is you're trying to reduce the likelihood of your child engaging in negative or bad behavior. Being grounded or put in timeout reduces the likelihood of that behavior. And then you're also removing the pleasant stimuli of attention from others. So that would be negative punishment. Okay, last slide, we're going to touch a little bit on observational learning. So we learn, most of what we learn is through observational learning. We are learning by observing and imitating others. And it requires 4 steps to truly learn something from someone else. So let's say you're trying to learn how to correctly shoot the basketball into the hoop. So you need to be paying close attention. You need to be seeing the angle at which they are holding the ball, how the right hand and left hand, where they are on it, how the energy is flowing through the body, what they are looking at, how their body is posed, everything. So that is number one, attention. If you're not paying that close of attention, then you're going to miss some key aspects as to how that person has maybe a good free throw percentage or good, shot percentage, whatever that is, then you need to, or field goal percentage, I should say. So you need to watch and pay attention to exactly how they do things. Next would be retention. If you can't retain that information, then it's not going to do you any good. You need to be able to remember and recall that information when the time comes for you to engage in that behavior. When it's time for you to shoot the basketball, you need to be able to retain the information that you took in while paying attention to the person modeling the behavior. Then we have motor reproduction. That is reproducing that movement that when you paid attention and you retained that information, you now need to replicate the same thing that they did. So you need to do what a lot of people, what I learned growing up playing basketball was beef. That's bend, eyes, elbow, follow through when it comes to shooting a basketball. Okay, so whenever you do that over and over and over again, like I talked about the child learning to use their forks and spoons while eating at the beginning of the chapter, then you create those neural pathways in your brain so that when you do this motor reproduction, it becomes muscle memory. It becomes seamless. It becomes something that you don't even have to think about. It becomes over and over and over again. And lastly, you need the motivation to do it. You need motivation to learn. You need if you're not motivated to learn how to do your job well, to shoot a basketball correctly, to do things the right way, then it doesn't matter if you pay attention or you retain or you do the motor reproduction. It doesn't matter because you're not going to have the energy output to correctly reproduce what you saw. And whenever we are learning from watching someone else, they are modeling the behavior. This is the act of observing behavior exhibited by someone else in order to imitate the behavior. Whether it's your parents, a lot of times we model our parents by looking at what they do. You model a coach, you model a teammate, you model a sibling, you model a friend, or they model for you. Or sometimes you're the model. Sometimes you're the model for someone younger than you, someone that you might be better than at whatever activity it is. As long as someone is watching what you do in order to learn from you, you are the model. I like to go to the gym and I like to sometimes watch what other people who seem more knowledgeable than I am or are doing something that I've never done before. I like to watch them and see how they do it so I can replicate it myself. They are modeling for me. I've seen, some people do some different things on some different weightlifting machines, or I've seen them, try something new that I've never seen before. And I see how it targets their muscles and they look good. They look nice and strong. So they are unknowingly modeling behavior for me to replicate. Okay. That is the end of chapter 5, and I'll see you next for chapter 6.